tonight we're sharing a social event and sharing a keynote. So all the Drumbeat people and all the Open Ed people will be in the same room. Joey is the CEO of Creative Commons and is a very active entrepreneur, was an early investor in Twitter, is involved in a lot of things. His keynote will be very short. It's going to be like a 15 or 20-minute talk. And there will also be a science fair kind of setup of all of the projects from Drumbeat that you have an opportunity to go around and see. So I really encourage you to come to the social tonight. Okay, so this is a talk about identifying concrete pedagogical benefits of OER. Again, the slides will eventually be here once I have bandwidth and an opportunity to upload them. So a question that we all ought to care about, and it's already been referenced at least once today in one of the sessions that I was in, is the so what question. What is the real value proposition for OER? Why do we invest in OER? Why do we do what we do with regard to OERs? So having asked that question, I want to show two of the ugliest slides I've ever been responsible for creating. And I want to propose to you that, at least in my mind, there's really two ways to think about the value proposition. One has to do with the relationship between cost and learning. So at the top left here, you can see the big gold star because cost has gone down and learning has gone up. If we can make that happen with OER, then something really useful has happened. In the bottom right-hand corner, learning has gone down and cost has gone up. That's bad if people are learning less and it's costing us more to do it. There's a little star on the axis right here where people are learning the same amount, but we've lowered the cost. That's valuable. We ought to care about that, I think. And then you can see the other variations here. But for me, I think the thing I'm most interested in is the big gold star, the one in which we decrease cost and hopefully improve learning outcomes. Another way, instead of thinking about increasing learning, another way we might think about it is in terms of increasing access. How many people actually have access to appropriate educational resources? So if we were to make metrics out of this on the learning side, we might talk about standard deviations per dollar invested, right? How much extra learning is happening per cost. And if our cost can go down and the standard deviations can go up, then that ratio gets very large. Or in terms of access, we might think about how many millions of people have access now that didn't have access before. How much did we have to spend relative to what we used to spend? So these are two ways to think about benefits largely. We're going to come around to the specific benefits of OER from a pedagogical perspective. But I want to begin with getting some clarity around what we're talking about when we're talking about the benefit of OER. Because if we confuse OER with not OER, then when we try to convince people there is a value proposition, it's very difficult for anybody to understand what we're talking about. So let's play a game called You Can Be Blank and Be Copyrighted. Okay? You can be digital and be copyrighted. You can be online and be copyrighted. You can be interactive and be copyrighted. You can be a formative assessment and be copyrighted. You can be wiki-based and be copyrighted. You can be project, but you can be collaborative. You can be all these things and be copyrighted. So what that means is it means that none of these things is a sufficient definition of an OER. Because you can pick any of these examples or 100 others we could think of and do them in a way that's fully and traditionally copyrighted. Does anyone want to disagree? I'll just pause for a question at this point. Does anyone disagree that any of these things have to be OER? Wow. Okay, Rory, thank you. I mean,
they don't have to be OER, but they can be OER.
They can be, but they don't have to be. Yes, agreed. But when we talk about something that's interactive, that doesn't of necessity mean that it's OER. Or when we talk about something that's wiki-based, it doesn't of necessity mean that it's OER. Right? So these characteristics of being digital and interactive with formative assessment and some project-based approach, those characteristics don't derive from the openness of a resource. These things could all be true of a fully copyrighted resource. So if these are undefinitions of OER, what is OER? Well, what distinguishes it from other kinds of resources is that it has an open license. And that's the only thing that distinguishes it from any other kind of educational resource. Hence the name open educational resource. So what does an open license mean? Well, we can argue about this a little bit. For me, it means that I don't pay anything for the resource and I get this set of 4 permissions. But for those of you who thought the entire conference would pass without a reference to learning objects, I will disappoint you here. You might remember this RAID acronym for, what makes a learning object a learning object. It's reusable, it's accessible, interoperable, and durable. And it could also be project-based, or it could be digital, it could be interactive, it could be an assessment, it could be a variety of things and not be an OER. What makes an OER different from a normal educational resource is that you get these additional permissions and that you don't have to pay for it. Okay, so the only difference between an open educational resource and an educational resource is that the open educational resource is open. Not that it's interactive, not that it's digital, not that it somehow uses analytics, but that it's open. So, if the real difference is that it's free and it gives me extra permissions, then if we want to ask questions about the concrete pedagogical benefits of open educational resources, then we have to ask, what is the plus giving us when the plus means free and it means extra permissions? It doesn't mean constructivist or connectivist or direct instruction or behaviorist. It doesn't say anything about format. It just says that this resource has an open license. So the addition of this open license gives us what? Another way of asking this question is, what strategies are open to the teacher? Let me choose a different term. What strategies are available to the teacher with an OER that are not available with another educational resource? Or what strategies or activities are available to a learner with an OER that are not available with a digital simulation with formative assessment along the way that was produced by Pearson and is fully copyrighted and is not an OER? What does the openness give us? I know I sound like I'm beating a horse on this point here, but I don't think this horse is dead yet, so we need to keep beating it. At a very, very high level, we could say that because these things are free, that will increase people's access to them. And so if 40% of students, for example, never buy a textbook for the class that they're enrolled in tertiary education, then if more people have textbooks, people with access to resources will probably outperform ones who don't have the resources in a very generic sense. I'll agree to that. Also, in terms of continuous quality improvement, if you have teachers who want to be reflective about their own practice and want to think about how they can improve it, or if you as an institution want to gather data and use analytics to build some rationale, empirical rationale, about how to improve what you do, the data and that reflective activity alone is not enough. If you do not have permission to make changes to the curriculum materials that you're using, you can understand where all the weak places are and not be able to act on that knowledge. So at a high level, again, we're coming to the specifics, but at a high level, if you want to engage in continuous quality improvement, either based on an individual subjective reflection or based on a larger scale analytics, you must have openness, or you must break the law to make the changes that you see are necessary. So at a high level, openness is required for continuous quality improvement. But this talk is supposed to be about specific, concrete pedagogical advantages. So here are 3 questions I want to use to guide this discussion, and then I'm going to tell you a story. What does openness, and only openness, what does openness enable? Why do we believe that that should make a difference? And I think, since we inherited some extra time, what does it cost? Does it cost us more or less? This very disturbing image. And all of this to say, I'm not focusing on cost because I think everyone understands that when you can get something for free, there are probably some cost implications. It probably costs less when you get something that's free, probably. The place we have to worry about, the thing we have to concern ourselves with, is where is the learning going to go? Is it going to go up or down? And empirical evidence would be best, but we should at least have some tenable theory about why we believe openness, not interactivity, not digital, not formative assessment, but openness. We should have some theory that's believable about why openness should result in some kind of improvement in learning. So I want to tell you a story about high school textbooks. This is a project that we're doing in Utah right now. So this last summer, I went in Brigham Young University as a partnership with the 5 school districts in the area around us. And some time ago, I went to a regular meeting of the curriculum coordinators for these high school districts and said, I have this idea about a project I think can save you money. And because budgets are the way they are now, I thought you might be interested in saving money. So I told them about open textbooks, and particularly the science and math textbooks that CK-12 produces for high school students. And as I told them about openness and explained permissions that you receive and that you can localize it to meet the needs of your local students and these kinds of things, they said, yeah, you're right, we probably would save some money with those books, but you're overlooking what's far and away the most interesting part of the proposal you're making to us to adopt open textbooks. You forget, like everyone else has forgotten, that in high schools, because we have a constrained budget and textbooks are so expensive, we buy a textbook and we put it on a 5 or a 7-year replacement cycle. So if you think back to high school, if your high school is like mine, you got a textbook when you came into class. At the end of class, you handed it back, and you were instructed under penalty of torture not to deface that book in any way, because 6 generations of students after you had to be able to use that textbook. Well, defacing also means highlighting. It also means annotating and note-taking and actually engaging that book in some kind of proactive way as a student, trying to use it really as a study resource, as opposed to kind of standing back from it and reading it but not being allowed to deface it in any way. So they said, these books you're talking about, if they're really this inexpensive, then we could probably just afford to buy a new book every year and give it to a student, and they could keep it. And that would mean that then we could give them permission to highlight and annotate and make notes in their books. And there is research that tells us when students use some of these more active study strategies with their textbooks that they do learn more, they should learn more. And I thought to myself, this is the first concrete example I can think of. I've never seen one before, and I didn't even come up with it. The district curriculum coordinators did. Here's a case where, because these books were open, there's good research base for us to look at and make a hypothesis that people will learn more as they use these open materials than they would have learned had they used proprietary alternative materials. And I thought, this is really disappointing. I don't think I've ever seen a specific instance of this until I sat in this meeting today. So what I'd like to invite you to do for a few minutes, if you're like Brian sitting alone, you have to move and go sit next to Scott. I'd like to invite you to turn to the person or persons next to you and just have a conversation for a minute and see if you can isolate openness as an attribute of a resource out separate from interactivity or formative assessments or the digital nature of it. Try to isolate openness out and come up with, the answers to these 3 questions here. Having isolated openness out, why should we believe that openness might lead to greater learning, separate from other things? Scott?
No, everybody should discuss it first.
Everyone should discuss it first. And we actually have a little more time than I was planning on having for you to have this discussion. So please find someone and talk to them about this issue. Okay, I would guess at this point that 75% of you, the topic of your conversation has drifted somewhere else. So it's okay to cut it off. We've got about 5 minutes left. So really all I want to do the rest of the time is ask you, did you come up with some good examples that you'd like to share with the rest of us? Because I would love to hear some. Please.
You can make summaries for your folks. Oh, sorry. One of the ideas we came up with is to make summaries of textbooks and publish that for students.
Okay, so what role does openness play in your ability to make a summary?
The ability to publish that to other people. So to take work from others and make it reuse it in a different form or a different format and publish that to other people.
So you're thinking of the summary as a derivative work of the original.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what's your theoretical rationale in terms of research that you're familiar with or something to think that access to a summary is going to improve?
Well, in my experience...
and your experience is fine.
Okay,
That's great.
Yeah. A summary is very helpful to prepare for an exam, for instance. And it's a common practice.
Okay. So that ability to the permission to make a derivative work results in a summary, which then okay, great. Someone else? Yeah, I sort of question that, but I don't want to pick on the first example, or nobody else will raise their hand. You know. Okay, Karen's got one right behind you there.
I might want to challenge your initial one.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
I think your initial example was actually an example of something that was low cost, not necessarily openness. So if we were going to go through the proper logical argument, was it definitely because it was open, or was it cheap because it was open? So I think the low cost element of it. So
right.
you can make that logic.
The cost element is part of the definition of openness that I put on the screen a moment ago.
But
right?
you could have a
this
non-open. Okay, the free part.
Yeah.
But you could do the same with a low cost thing that was not free.
Okay.
So it's just the logic of it that's not necessarily linked directly to the openness. Is my thought.
Yeah, depending on the definition. Yeah.
Okay. But I will.
Okay.
That was just my challenge. But we came up with another one.
Great.
Which you can now challenge me back.
Let's hear it.
Which is from the keynote this morning. It's this reduction of friction. That the pedagogical element of it. That if you're strapped for time, you're trying to make a point. The example I would use is images. Images are good things for communicating. Mm-hmm. We've got Flickr now that you can go through, the ease of which you can find an image to illustrate a point you want to make and be sure that there's no problem with you using it, mm-hmm. is the openness of the licensing. So that, to me, is a clear thing of it. Reduces time, reduces effort.
So is it just a cost thing? Yes, so now I'm going to reflect your own argument back to you now.
No, not a cost thing. A time and availability and rights thing. So you could do the same thing. You could equally find an image that was not freely, openly available and go to the author. But that's a process that.
But you could
takes
find an
some
image
time.
on CNN.com that's on the public web that's fully copyrighted that you could bring up in your classroom, and it didn't cost you anything. You haven't exercised any permissions. You've just taken advantage of a free resource that's fully copyrighted.
I agree. You win.
Okay, we got time for one more. You choose. I don't know. There's too many hands up. Martin.
I probably shouldn't ever go, as I'm going to be up for the next bit.
It's your own time you're eating into,
I know,
by the way. Yeah.
Relax. There's some research that they took a company catalogue and they looked at buying behaviour on the kind of paper catalogue, and then when people put it online, and going back to kind of the stuff Eric was talking about this morning, the kind of online behaviour was much more kind of niche oriented, so people kind of really started exhibiting long tail behaviour, so even with the same product there. So you could argue that open resources will create that kind of the critical mass for a real kind of long tail of learning, because you're never going to get these kind of real niche interests if you're kind of just looking at proprietary products, because people won't make them because there's not enough kind of return on investment.
Because there's no sufficient market for them because they're so niche.
But if your interest is the history of Dundee Football Club, whatever, it's not many people are going to be into that. But if there's enough people and it's open, then you can begin to get that kind of long tail niche interest, which I think has some interesting kind of educational benefits for us.
Yeah. Well, we're out of time. I apologize. But I just want to encourage you to think more about, and it's whatever openness means to you. You don't have to adopt my definition. That's fine. But I invite you to separate out openness from these other things that aren't openness, like interactivity or the digital nature of the resource. And try to start to think really rigorously and connect it to either to the research base or to your own experience as a teacher. What benefit do we get from being open? Or is all the benefit that we get just from being digital and interactive and, it happens to be free because it has an open license? I just encourage you to be more critical and thoughtful about that, and thank you for the conversation.